I don't really know how to start this, and I have been putting it off for a while now, because even now, just writing it down make my heart race again. But I need to share this. I have to, because I am not sure if I am just losing my mind or if what I saw out there in the race was something real, something I can't explain. So, let me give you some context. I live out in the mountains of Arizona, not far from the Navajo Nation. It's mostly wilderness around here, dense trees, brush, and open desert. Some people call it the RIS, short for the rest, the Native American Reservation, where it's a lot of wide open land, not much around except dirt roads, small homes, and the occasional trailer. It's a quiet but a beautiful place, and eerie at night. Everyone who lives here has a story of their own. I grew up hearing tales of skinwalkers, strange creatures, and the things that are lurk in the shadows. I used to brush it off, most of us, as a superstition, but after that night, I can't do that anymore. It was a late fall evening when it all started. I was hanging out at my friend's house, just off the main road that wound through the reservation. We were sitting on the porch, drinking a couple of beers and talking about random stuff. The night was colder than usual, but it was still manageable. The kind of chill that make your breath fog up in the air. But it wasn't too bad. My friend's dog, a big German Shepherd that named Max, was out in the yard, sniffing around. He was always patrolling, so when he suddenly started barking at nothing in particular, I don't think much of it. You heard that? I asked, nodding toward the door. Max does that every night. My friend shrugged, sipping his beer. He's just being a dog and curious about things. But then, Max started barking even louder, more urgently, like he was really pissed off at something. His tail was straight, ears perked, and he was looking out toward the woods. And seeing all this made me feel very uneasy. Even more so when I noticed how still everything else was. No crickets, no wind, nothing. It felt really off. I'm going to take a walk, I told my friend, trying to shake off the uncomfortable feeling growing in my chest at the moment. I didn't want to admit that I was already feeling the kind of unease you get when you are out in the woods at night, being alone yourself, the kind that make you feel like something is watching you. You sure? My friend asked, clearly not as keen on being outside anymore. Yeah, I will be back in a bit. So I grabbed my jacket, and with Max still barking in the distance, I head down the dirt path that led into the nearby forest. I don't think anything of it. People go for a walk around here all the time, even at nights. The moment I stepped into the woods, the temperature suddenly dropped. Not just a little, but sharply. The trees loomed above me, their shadows stretching unnaturally long in the moonlight. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was alive at the moment, and that something was aware of me being there. I kept walking, trying to push the feeling of paranoia aside. After about 20 minutes, I found myself farther from the house than I intended. The sound of the world outside, the humming of distant cars, the rustling of leaves was gone. It was just me and the night, complete silence. I stopped and started listening. That's when I heard it, a rustling from behind me. At first, I thought it was just a window or an animal. I turned around, my heart skipping a beat. There was nothing. The path behind me was empty and still, the trees bending in the wind, but no movement. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was completely wrong. I kept walking, but I can't escape the sense that I wasn't alone anymore. Every now and then, I had heard another rustle, like someone was following me or something. I glanced back every few steps, but there was nothing behind me. So I continued walk, glancing behind me at every few steps. It was then that I saw it. A figure just off the trail, standing between the trees. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, maybe a trick of the moonlight. But no, it was definitely a shape. A person? No. The more I looked at it, the more it doesn't seem like a person. It was hunched over, its arms unnaturally long. Its body was covered in ragged clothing, but its face was twisted. It looked like it was wearing the skin of something human, but there was something deeply wrong about it. The eyes were too wide, and the skin was stretched, like it didn't fit the body. I froze in my place. My first thought was it was probably a prank, some kind of sick joke. But the more I stared, more I realized it wasn't moving like a person. It was swaying gently, like it was trying to blend in with the trees, almost like it didn't want to be seen but couldn't help itself. After staring for a few moments, I took a step forward. No humans move like that. It was too fast and too jerky of a motion, almost like it was stumbling but controlling its movement at the same time. I turned around and started walking quickly, my heart thundering in my chest. But I didn't dare to look back. The path was suddenly became long and dark. Every step felt like it was being watched, and I swear to God, I could feel something behind me. That's when I heard it again. The footstep, it's getting close. Not normal footsteps, too fast, too erratic. I didn't want to look back even then, but I couldn't stop myself. When I did look back, the figure was closer now. I could see it clearly. Its skin wasn't white. It was stretched over its bones, too thin, its mouth open wide, too wide. Its teeth were sharp, like the teeth of an animal, not anything like a human. It was grainy. After seeing this, That's when I started to run. I took off, the sound of my boots hitting the dirt mixing with the mare scrambling behind me. I could hear it now. Its footsteps were faster, like it was chasing me. But there was no rhythm to it. It was like it was just everyone closing in from all directions. I don't know how long I ran, but I didn't stop until I burst through the trees and found myself back on the familiar dirt road near my friend's house. I didn't even hesitate. I knocked on the door, panting, and my body shaking uncontrollably, not caring about how crazy I must have looked. My friend opened it with a confused look on his face. But when he saw my face, his expression changed. You saw it, didn't you? He asked, his voice low, almost like he was afraid to say it out loud. What was that thing? He paused, looked out at the night, then he turned back to me, his eyes wide with a kind of fear. Then he said, it is a skinwalker. You don't go walking out in those woods at night, not alone, not ever. I look at my friend's face with a shaking leg. After he said that, I looked back into the dark forest. Then I saw two glowing eyes in the woods, staring back at me. It was the fall of 2012, and I had just moved to a small, secluded cabin in the woods near a little town called Black Pine. I needed a fresh start after some personal troubles, and this place seemed perfect for some peace and quiet. The air was crisp, the leaves were turning vibrant reds and orange, and the peace of being out in the middle of nowhere felt like a dream. I had been there long before I realized the townspeople didn't want to talk too much about the woods. They always give me these strange looks whenever I asked questions about hiking or the trails that run through the forest. It wasn't that they were rude, just evasive. I shrugged it off as a small town weirdness. But then, things started happening. I remember the first time I heard it, the thing that started to creep into my thoughts. I was sitting on my porch on one evening, just watching the sun dip below the horizon, the sky turning from orange to a wonderful purple. I had just finished dinner and was nursing a cup of coffee when I heard it. It was a sound unlike anything I had ever heard before. It wasn't a complete howl, not quite there. It was this low, throaty growl, like something was trying to speak through its teeth. It echoed through the old tree line, and for a second I thought it was this kind of animal, a bear, maybe even a mountain lion. But then it sounded wrong. The growl came again, but closer this time. My chest tightened, and my hand instinctively gripped the coffee cup more tighter. I listened carefully, but all I could hear Now was the wind and the distant call of an owl. The hound. It was gone, just like that. Over the next few days, I kept hearing that sound. It wasn't there for every night, but often enough to make me uneasy. I tried to tell myself it was nothing but just some wild animals, maybe a big coyote. But deep down, I knew that it didn't sound right. Then, after a few days passed by, one night I decided to go for a walk to clear my head, and it was full moon out there. The night was alive with sound of insects and rustling leaves all around me. I walked down the dirt path that led into the woods that ran through behind my cabin, the trees casting long shadows in the moonlight. The farther I went, the more the woods seemed to close in around me. It was quiet, eerily so. And then, after walking for a few minutes, I heard it again, the growl. But this time, it was much closer, so close I could feel it in my chest. My heart started to race, and I froze in my place. I looked around, but I saw nothing. The forest was dead silent, save for the wind rustling and the leaves above me. I started to walk faster, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. My mind was racing. What if it was a bear? Or, or maybe, what if it was something more worse? I didn't know how far I had walked until I realized I was completely turned around. The path I had been following had just disappeared in front of me. Then panic started to set in. That's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, something moved. It was just a flicker, but it was enough to make me stood up in my tracks. I turned my head slowly, trying to locate whatever it was. My breath caught me in my throat when I saw it. A shape, darker than the shadows of the trees around me, and it was moving among the trunks. At first, I thought it was a man, a tall, hunched over, with long arms. But there was something wrong with it. Its movements were too fluid, too fast, and its posture was all wrong. It wasn't a man at all. It was too big, and it was watching me. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at the thing that stood behind the tree lines. It was like my body couldn't move, couldn't react, because the fear had frozen me in place. Its eyes, if you could call them that, were glowing faintly, like a yellow domes that reflect the moonlight. They were locked on me, and it felt like they were seeing right through me, into some part of my soul. Then, without any warning, it moved. It darted between the trees faster than I could comprehend, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. I stumbled backward, my heart racing like never before. My legs shook as I turned and ran, desperately trying to find my way back to the cabin. The growl echoed behind me, a haunting sound that made every nerve in my body scream. After running through the forest for so much time, I finally made it back to the cabin, slamming the door behind me. I leaned against it, trying to catch my breath, but my mind was reeling. What had I just seen? Was it even real? My hands were trembling as I grabbed my phone, but of course, there was no service out there. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every snap of a branch outside had me on the edge. The ground haunted me, echoing in my mind. I kept thinking about the eyes that watched me through the trees, through the darkness, staring into my soul. I spent the night without any sleep. The next day, I went into the town and tried to get some answer. I figured I could at least ask around, talk to some of the locals, and maybe find out what kind of animal lived in those woods. I wasn't expecting anyone to be helpful, but I had to try. I started with the bartender at the local pub, a guy named Dave, who seemed like the type to know things like this. He gave me a long look when I asked him about the woods, and I could tell he wasn't sure whether to take me seriously. You didn't hear anything about the thing in the woods, did you? He asked me after a long pause after my question. I raised an eyebrow. What thing? He leaned in, lowering his voice. The thing that roam around there. Some folks say it's a werewolf. Some say it's something else. But it's not something you want to mess with. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. What exactly are you saying? He looked around, was making sure no one was listening. There were stories, old stories, about a creature that's roamed the woods. It's not something you can just explain anyway. People who have gone out there at night, they don't come back the same after seeing that thing. If they come back at all in the first place. I laughed nervously, but there was no humor in it. I asked him, so you are telling me that there's a monster out there? Dave didn't smile. I am telling you that people have been seeing things in the woods, and some of them haven't lived to tell the tales. I felt a chill settle over me, my mind racing as I processed what he just said. A werewolf? A monster? In this century? It sounded insane, but after what I had seen, it was starting to make sense. I thanked him, paid for my drink, and left the pub, feeling a heaviness in my chest. That night, I stayed inside. I didn't go anywhere near the woods. I figured maybe if I stay put, I'll be safe, but that didn't help. The growl returned. They were louder now, and they were right outside my door. I grabbed a flashlight. I wasn't going to go out there, no matter what, but I had to know what was making those sounds. I slowly made my way to the window and peeked outside, shining my flashlight into the darkness. At first, I didn't see anything, just the usual forest, silent and still. But all of a sudden, I caught a glimpse of a movement. It was fast, too fast, a shape darting between the trees, just like before. And then, those eyes returned, those glowing eyes, staring back at me. I gasped and stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The thing growled again, its voice low and guttural, sending waves of fear through my body. My leg felt weak, but I forced myself to move. I grabbed the phone again, but there was still no service. I didn't know what to do. The growling was getting louder and closer. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't just wait to be hunted down like some animal. I grabbed what I could carry and bolted for the door. Running fast as I could down the dirt road that led to the town. My breath was ragged, and I didn't dare to look back. I could hear the growls, the sound of something chasing me. I don't remember how long I ran, but when I finally made it to the edge of the town, I stopped. The growls had faded, and the only sound could I hear was my own labored breathing. I turned around, but there was nothing behind me, nothing but an empty dirt road. But I knew it was still out there, whatever it was, and it was waiting for me. But I never went back to the cabin again. I need to get something off my chest, and this is the only place I can think to share it. I know it's going to sound crazy, but it happened to me, and I can shake the fear from that night. A few months ago, I decided to take a solo camping trip to a remote forest near northern New Mexico. I had heard about this place from an old travel blog. Deep woods, no cell service, a few miles from the nearest town. It sounded like the perfect escape from the daily grind and a great opportunity for some solo reflection. I drove out there on a Friday afternoon, the forest growing denser the farther I went. The road was gravel and twisted through the trees, with barely enough room for one car. I finally reached the small, overgrown clearing where I planned to camp for the night. It was the kind of place that felt untouched by time. Ancient trees, the smell of pine, and a profound silence. I set up my tent and made a small fire. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of leaves and a distant call of some bird. It was serene, but there was an undercurrent of unease that I couldn't quite place. The sunlight faded quickly, and as dusk fell, the forest seemed to come alive, but in a different way. As darkness settled in, I hear the first strange noise, a faint whisper carried by the wind. I couldn't make out any words, but it was like someone was murmuring just out of sight. I brushed it off as the wind moving through trees, though there was something unsettling about it. I sat by the fire, trying to ignore the creeping sensation that I wasn't alone. The whispers continued, growing a little louder and more persistent. They seemed to drift around the campsite like shadows moving just beyond the edge of the firelight. Then came the noises from the forest, soft, dragging sounds that seemed to move closer, then retreat, only to return again. The noises were irregular and unsettling too, like the shuffling of feet or the dragging of a heavy object. I tried to ignore the sound, focusing on the fire and the comfort it brought. But as the night went on, the noises grew more intense. I could hear the whispers more clearly now, though they still seemed unintelligible and distant. The dragging sounds became more frequent, more pronounced. So I decided to investigate. I grabbed my flashlight and ventured into the darkness. The beam cutting through the thick shadows. The forest was unweariedly quiet. As I walked, the sound of the fire fading behind me. I was deep in the woods now, the trees towering above and the darkness swallowing the light. The whispers grew louder as I walked, though I still couldn't make out any words from it. It was like a chorus of hushed voices just beyond my hearing. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I moved forward, the beam of the flashlight revealing nothing but more trees and tangled underbrush. I stopped when I heard a new sound, a guttural growl coming from behind me. I spun around, the flashlight revealing nothing but darkness yet again. The growl was closer now, almost as if something was circling me. I started to head back to the campsite, the feeling of being followed growing more stronger and stronger. The growl grew more intense, a deep, menacing sound that seemed to echo through the tree line. I could hear something moving in the shadows, a presence just out of sight. When I reached the clearing, I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the firelight. It was tall and thin, almost skeletal. Its skin was sickly grey, stretched tightly over its bones. Its eyes were black voids, reflecting the flickering flames of the fire. The figure was eerily still, watching me with an emptiness that sent chills down my spine. The whispers had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. The growl was now a low rumble, resonating from the darkness beyond the clearing. I backed away, my hands trembling as I fumbled for my flashlight. I tried to shine my flashlight towards the figure, but the light seemed to dissipate in the void of its gaze. The figure remained motionless, a dark, menacing presence that seemed to grow more threatening with every second passing by. Then the whispers started again, but they were no longer distant. They were right in my ears, The voices were clear now, and they were saying my name. Come to us, they whispered. Come and see. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or look away from the figure. The whispers grew more distant, filling my mind with a cold, desperate urge to follow them into the darkness. I snapped out and turned to run. Then I stumbling over the uneven ground as I made my way back to the campsite. I could hear the figure following me, moving silently through the forest. The growl was louder now, more aggressive, and the whispers became distorted voices. When I reached the campsite, I threw myself into the tent, pulling the flap shut and zipping it as quickly as I could. The figure was still outside, its presence a looming threat just beyond the fabric of the tent. The growling and whispering continued outside, growing louder and more frantic as the night went on. I huddled in the corner of the tent, tried to ignore the sounds and convince myself that I was safe in my tent. The noises eventually faded. The growl became a distant rumble, and the whispers dying down to a faint murmur. I stayed in the tent, terrified to move or make a sound, until the first light of dawn crept through the fabric. When morning came, the forest was still and silent. I emerged from the tent to find that clearing was empty. The figure was gone, and the forest was eerily calm. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could, my hands shaking with every moment. I left the forest and drove back to the town, not daring to look back at the dark woods as I left. The memories of that night has haunted me ever since, and I still hear those whispers in my dreams. What I encountered might have been a skinwalker, an entity from Native American folklore that uses its malevolence to lure and terrorize. The descriptions I read matched what I experienced: the whispers, the growling, the dark presence. I haven't been camping since that night, and I don't know if I ever will be. The forest holds a darkness that I can't ignore, and the memories of that night are a constant reminder of what lurks in the shadows. If anyone here has experienced something similar or know more about skinwalkers, I'd love to hear from you. I'm still trying to understand what happened and why it happened to me. So, be safe out there. It happened years ago, but it's still a vivid memory in my mind. It's not the kind of thing I talk about often because people don't believe in these things like skinwalkers. Or if they do, they think it's all just stories, a folklore. I used to think that too until I had my own experience. It was back in the late 90s. I was a kid, living with my family on a small property just outside a quiet town in North Arizona. Our land bordered a stretch of pines that were dense, enough to feel like the forest went on forever. We used to play out there all the time, my brothers and I, building forts, chasing each other through the trees, and exploring the open land. We were close to nature, and my parents were big on teaching us survival skills and the importance of respecting the land. I remember that summer. The air was thick with the heat, and the forest was dry, the scent of dust and pine risen hanging in the air. It was the kind of dry that made the world feel heavier, like it was holding its breath. On one evening, I was out near the pines with my older brother Mark. He was always the more daring one of the two of us. And that evening, he was pushing me to explore a part of the forest that we have never ventured before. It wasn't that we didn't go deep into the woods. It was just the thing. The area felt really off. There was an ancient feeling to it, like the trees themselves were watching you. I'm not sure how to explain it further than that. But even as a kid, I could sense something was quite right. Mark, of course, wasn't scared. He was 17 and had the air of invisibility that comes with being a teenager. Come on, we will be fine, he said, tossing a rock into the bush, not even looking back to see if I was following. What's the worst thing could happen? That was the first mistake. The second one was when we heard the sound. It was almost like a person, but not quite. A low, gravely voice, deep and twisted, almost like it was trying to mimic a human, but couldn't get it right. It echoed from somewhere deeper in the trees, and though I couldn't make out any words, there was a sense of urgency to it. I thought I heard my name being called out, but when I turned to Mark, he was already a few steps ahead, walking further into the forest. Did you hear that? I asked, my voice shaking. He glanced back, rolling his eyes. It's probably just a coyote. Stop being a baby. But I couldn't shake the feeling. It wasn't the sound of any coyote. It was wrong. And then I saw it. At first, it was just a flash of movement, too quick to be anything I could identify. Something pale, almost white, darting between the trees. I froze, staring into the darkening shadow of the pines, my heart hammering in my chest. My skin prickled as if a cold wind had blown across it, even though the air was still warm. My mouth went dry. I tried to call out, Mark, trying to keep the panic from creeping into my voice. He turned again. I know it this time. I swear, if you're acting like a baby, come on, just a little further. But when I looked back into the trees, I saw it again. A figure, tall, but unnaturally tall, moving between the trunks of the pine with unnatural grace. It didn't make any noise, but the way it moved, like it was gliding rather than walking, that sent a chill down my spine. I turned to Mark. We need to go back, I said. I was barely above a whisper. What? He raised an eyebrow. Are you serious, dude? There's nothing out there. That's just. That's when it came closer. Step out from behind one of the trees. I didn't understand what I was seeing at first. It looked like a person, but everything about it was wrong. Its limbs were too long, too spindly, and the way it moved, it wasn't human. It was like watching something that didn't belong in this world, like it had stepped out of a nightmare. Its skin was pale, stretched tight over its bone, and its face was hideous. Its eyes were too big, dark, and empty, like pits. Its mouth, its mouth was the worst part. It was wide and opened up to an unnatural angle, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth that seemed to gleam in the fading light. Before I could react, the thing opened its mouth wide, and then that's when I heard it, my name, Jason. The voice wasn't Mark, it was deep, rasping like the growl of an animal, but somehow it sounded like it was trying to imitate him. I could feel my heart skip a beat, and in that moment, all the hairs on my back of my neck stood up. Jason, come closer. Jason. I didn't know what to do. It wasn't just the thing itself that terrified me, it was the way it was calling my name. It wasn't like a voice I had never heard before. It wasn't Mark's, but it was close enough to make my blood run cold. The worst part, I could feel it in the every pit of my stomach that it knew things about me, things it shouldn't have known, things no one would know unless they had been watching me for a long, long time. That was when Mark turned around. What the hell, man? I'm tired of you. I grabbed him by the arm, pulling him back, nearly knocking him off balance. Mark, Mark, we need to get out from here, now. He yanked his arm away, visibly frustrated. What's your deal? It's just some weird shadow or something. You're freaking out for no reason, dude. But I wasn't freaking out. Not for no reason. I forced him to follow me as I stumbled back the way we came, my eyes locked on the shadow that had started following us. It wasn't running or even walking, it was just gliding closer and closer, like it was in no hurry, just toying with us. Jason, the voice again, so much closer. The hairs on my back stood up on the end, and I couldn't shake the feeling that if I looked back, I had seen it right behind me. I couldn't explain why. I knew that if we stopped, if we even slowed down, it could catch us. I pulled Mark along with me as fast as my leg would carry me, my breath coming in short, panicked gasp. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel it, the presence just behind us, the sound of its movement, soft but deliberate, haunted the edge of my hearing. The trees blurred around us. I pushed forward, every step heavier, like the forest itself was trying to hold me back. My mind was screaming at me to move and don't stop, but my body felt like it was slowing down with every breath and every step I take. Jason, slow down, Mark shouted. I couldn't risk it all. I heard him curse under his breath, But he followed. Good thing too. Because when I turned the corner of the thick cluster of pines, I stumbled over a branch, nearly losing my footing. I grabbed onto a tree trunk for my support, my heart hammering in my chest. And I looked back on my shoulder. That's when I saw it. The figure, standing a good 20 feet away, motionless. It was just watching. Its eyes, those dark hollow pits, were locked on me, as if it was enjoying our fear. Jason. It was louder this time, sharper, like a command. I dragged Mark, pulling him back, but he jerked his arm away, clearly losing patience. What the hell is wrong with you? His voice was shaky, but there was a flicker of anger in his eyes. This is stupid. It's just some animal. Before he could finish, there was a sound, a quick, sharp crack. It came from behind us. My blood ran cold. I whipped around, expect to see the thing close in the distance. But what I saw was worse, much worse. There were two of them now. The one we had seen earlier, still standing there, and another, equally terrifying. This one had its face hiding by a tangle of long, black hair, but I could see the pale, bony fingers curling around the trunk of a nearby tree. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle. The way it stood, like it was waiting for something, sent a chill down my spine. Mark, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Mark, we need to run, now. I didn't wait for him to respond. I grabbed his arm and pulled him again, almost tumbling back the way we came. The sound of footsteps behind us, soft, slithering across the forest floor, told me they were still following. They weren't running, they didn't need to. My heart was in my throat, and my legs were starting to give out from the strain. The pines ahead seemed to close in on us, the darkness in between them thick and oppressive, like it was waiting for us to fall into its grasp. I didn't dare to look back. I couldn't. But I heard it, the voice, echoing through the trees, chilling my very soul. Suddenly, suddenly, Mark screamed, a high-pitched, desperate sound that echoed through the trees, cutting off all other noise. I turned, but it was too late. He was gone. There was a flash of movement, something that wasn't human, and then nothing. He had vanished into the shadows of the forest, and all that was left the sound of the wind rustling the leaves. My heart slammed against my rib, and I stood there, frozen. My mind was racing. Jason. The voice came from behind me, but this time it was right there. I didn't think. I didn't stop to ask myself any more questions. My feet were already moving, running faster than I ever had in my life before, as though my survival was depending on putting as much distance between me and whatever had taken Mark. My eyes scanned the trees desperately for any sign of him, but it was no use. The woods had swallowed him. I came to a clearing in the forest, gasping for breath, my legs burning, and I stopped, trying to catch my bearings. The pines, which had once seemed so full of life, were now silent, too silent. It was like the forest was holding its breath. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Not the soft padding of an animal, but something deliberate, calculated. Slowly I turned around. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was the creature, the one that had been following us. It was so much closer now, its pale, hollow eyes staring right at me. And in that moment, I realized with a sickening certainty that it wasn't just following me. It was waiting for me to take the next move. Jason, the voice rasped again, but this time it was no longer just imitating me. It was mocking me, playing with me. The way it said my name twisted in the air, making my skin crawl. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. There was no escape, no way to outrun the creature. My heart pounded in my chest, and a deep primal fear surged through me. I turned, my eyes frantically searching for some way out. There was nothing but the pines, closing like a cage. Then, the creature, tall and impossibly thin, stepped forward, and in that instant, I understood it wasn't just playing with me. It wanted me the way it had wanted Mark, and like Mark, I knew what would happen next. Jason, the voice whispered again, but this time there was something different in it, something colder. It sounded like Mark, but I can clearly see it was not him. He's gone. He's no longer there. It's just the voices. I turned and ran from the forest, and I didn't stop until I reached my home, screaming for my parents and telling them that Mark went missing. We searched for a while, informing the police and the news, but to this day, we didn't find them. I never went back to the forest. After this happened, we moved out from there, but that day still haunts me. Hope you guys like this video. If you did, please consider subscribing to this channel. Enable the bell icon so you don't miss new uploads. And also check out other videos in this channel too. Like them and share them. And if you have any suggestions or any improvements I need to make in this channel, please post them in the comment section. Till next time, this is Malayali Wendigo. Bye.